It says Christian on there because we're super formal, but he actually goes by Chris, so we'll just use Chris today. So, Chris is a Herb Institute grad. Show of hands, how many of you know what Herb is? ERB? How many of you are Ross students? Not too many here today. Okay, he'll tell you a little bit about Herb in a second, but that is an amazing program here at U of M. He graduated with his MBA in 2012. While he was a student, he served as the president of the Ross Energy Club as a clean tech fellow. In addition to that, he became pretty active in the case competitions. The first one he won was sponsored by McKinsey, and the second one that he won was the Boston Consulting Group. That, I think, we'll find out from him, may have led to the first step in his post-graduation career when he went to go work for the Boston Consulting Group. He spent about 6 years there, and then afterward, he goes over to a small startup that we all have probably heard of called WeWork. He goes over there in 2018, a very interesting time period to make your transition over to WeWork. He is there while the company goes through all of the public hurdles that we all bear witness to. He led the global strategy and operations. After the failed IPO, he joined the executive team to help turn the company towards profitability, which is a hell of an undertaking. I'm interested to hear all about it. And then, lo and behold, after that, he was recruited to come over to another incredibly fast-growing startup called Maven Clinic, which was founded and is run by CEO Kate Ryder, an LSA alum, who has absolutely changed the scene in digital health. So excited to have him here today from the East Coast. Without further ado, Chris Hicks. Thank you.
Make sure you're on.
All right, thanks, Eric, and really excited to be here with all of you today to tell you a little bit about my journey from Michigan into the real world and my journey into entrepreneurship. And you'll just see I kind of started going to earlier and earlier stage companies in my career. And one of the points I want to leave you with is that entrepreneurship is as much about making a bet on yourself as it is about making a bet on an idea. And part of what's happened in my journey is becoming ready to take that bet on myself and see where I could contribute in helping one of these earlier stage companies grow. So go through kind of the try, risk, fail, do framework here. Starting off with try. So this is me leaving Michigan and going out into the real world. I got 2 degrees here, an MBA and an MS in natural resources and the environment. And I thought I was going to be a clean tech entrepreneur. I was all gung-ho. I was going out to San Francisco. I was meeting with companies out there. And what I realized was that nobody cared about my MBA. Nobody cared about my MS in sustainable energy systems. Startups were looking for 2 things. They need to build something, and a lot of you in the room are engineers, so that probably bodes better for you than it did for me. And they need to sell. And selling is something that I think is incredibly underrated. It's not something that even at business school folks are learning or focusing on, and nobody thinks they're going to go into a career in sales. But selling is half the battle in any of these startups. So I had neither of those capabilities at the time. So I got sucked into consulting, which might have been the easy way out. But that's where I landed outside of Ross. So second component here is risk. And risk is after 6 years at BCG, kind of on that comfortable consulting track, I decided to jump to an earlier stage startup. WeWork wasn't super early at the time, but it was a bit of a risk, probably more of a risk in retrospect than it was at the time. But I joined WeWork, and WeWork was in this hyper growth phase. So when I joined, we had 4,500 employees. By the time we peaked, we had about 12,500 employees, and we were hiring hundreds of people a week. And my first day at WeWork, my first week, I remember realizing there were probably 7 other people that started that same week as me and thought they had the same exact job as I did. And so I was like, okay, this is gonna be tough to figure out how to navigate this. But what I did, and one of the other key lessons I had, was I started to hire people. And hiring is probably the most important factor in success in building a team, building a company. So much of it comes down to, can you hire really good people and get them to do good work? So I hired a few people, and I said, you've got 2 jobs here. I know this place is a mess. And other learning was every single startup out there that you can imagine looks a lot better from the outside than the inside. And I said, I know this place is crazy. If you do good work and we hold ourselves to a really high caliber of what we're going to deliver, and don't be a jerk, I might have used more colorful language at the time, but do good work and don't be a jerk, and everything else is going to work out. And that was kind of the mantra for this team I started to build up. And over time, we became this team that was really trusted advisors to the C-suite at WeWork and started to get involved in a lot of really interesting things that were going on. Which brings me to the next one. I'm actually not going to talk about WeWork for this. I'm sure that's going to come up in the questions. But there are a lot of examples I could have pointed to here for fail around WeWork. But what I'm actually going to talk about here is my transition to Maven Clinic. And so Maven Clinic is a digital health company for women's and family health. At the time I joined Maven Clinic, we had about 140 people. And I had just been through this experience at WeWork where we were trying to figure out how do we get this thing back to profitability or some semblance of profitability. And my job for 8 months was to figure out where all the bodies were buried, how we could get more cash flow out of the business, how we could stop the losses. And I joined Maven, and I said, here's this amazing skill set I have that I know how to go into a company, find out all the places that were being inefficient, and start to drive it back towards efficiency. So that's what I did. I started getting into the weeds at Maven, understanding our unit economics, understanding where the money was going. And I remember our founder, Kate Ryder, fellow Michigan alum, she pulled me aside maybe 3 months into the job, and she said, look, you're doing great work, but I don't need you focused on efficiency right now. I have a CFO. He's going to watch the dollars and the cents. I need you to make this company grow. And that just instantly, like a light bulb went off. I'm like, it makes sense. Like, we are at this stage of company where our future success right now, getting investor money in the door at that time, was going to depend on whether or not we could show a credible path to growth. And so I had to totally flip my mindset from where it had been at WeWork. And I think that growth versus optimization spectrum is just something that I've continued to be really fascinated by. And companies go through these different phases. Even now with the outside markets being as they are, you're seeing this big pivot where venture capitalists are going to say, oh, actually, we care about efficiency. We care about show me a path to profitability. It's not about the growth. But they still deep down want to see the growth. They just want to see both at the same time, which is a really hard dynamic to deliver on. But it was an interesting learning in listening to the markets, listening to where the stage of a company is, and at times you got to focus on growth, and you're going to make some inefficient decisions along that path. And that's okay. And there are other times and places where you need to really be thinking about efficiency and how are we going to get this thing to profitability over time. So the last one here is DO. And DO, I'm going to throw a couple of acronyms at you here. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with this. But one of my roles at Maven Clinic has been to incubate kind of new businesses that weren't small enough that we wanted to have a dedicated product team against them. And we didn't want them to really become a distraction for the company. So one of the things I took on was staffing up kind of SWAT teams to start to build these things out. One was our ability to serve global customers outside of the US. So we have a digital app, which kind of by definition can be global, but we needed to make sure that we are meeting the needs of our members who are on their own family building journeys anywhere in the world. And at the same time, we had to be out there selling in the market the capabilities that we had and the capabilities that we were building. And a key component in this was having a minimum viable product. And you don't need to have everything perfectly buttoned up to have something that you can go out and sell, and probably something that's a lot better than whatever anybody else is putting out there in the market. So that was one of the key learnings for me, was that we didn't need to dot all the I's and cross all the T's. We needed to build out that MVP, and then we needed to get something in the market quick, even get it in the market before we even knew we were going to be able to deliver it on time. But that has really been a key driver of our growth, as it has been for a lot of startups, because once that MVP is out there, you start to learn more, you start to be able to refine it and make it better, but you need to get out there fast. You can't wait. The second thing around do is that at any startup that hits the stage that Maven was at when I joined, so over 100 employees, clearly some things are going well in the market for us. There are so many things that you can do. And that was part of the challenge, was that all across the company there were ideas, there were teams that were starting up that we didn't have before. I remember kind of the first time I realized that there was something that I used to do as like 10% of my time, and I looked over there and I was like, oh, now there's a team of 5 people that do that all day long. And as you build out those teams, people want to run in all different directions. There's a lot of great ideas. OKRs, which maybe some of you are familiar with the OKR framework, it's objectives and key results. That has been really critical for us to have an overarching framework where we can say, okay, what are the goals of the company? And what is everybody working on that ladders up to those goals and contributes to those goals? So that's something that at Maven Clinic, I've spent a lot of time over the last 2 years really putting in place a structure and a process so that every team at Maven has OKRs that we measure quarterly, and hopefully we can use that to make sure that every single employee at Maven, as we've grown to nearly 600 people now in the last 2 years, knows how what they're doing on a day-to-day basis ladders up to where we're trying to get to as a company. So that's all I got on that framework there, but I guess I'll sit down now, and Eric's got some questions for me.
Thank you. I mean, I don't know where to begin picking that apart. There's so many areas to go, but we have to play to the audience here. We got to talk about WeWork for a second. We got to dive into that. So just run us through this understanding. You're at WeWork, the IPO fails. A lot of people would look at this and go, okay, time to jump off this ship before it sinks. I got to get out of here. You look at it and say, hey, opportunity. How did you know? How did you know that was the thing to do? What gave you the confidence to make that choice?
Yeah, so when the IPO fell apart, it was a bit of the Wild West for a few weeks. We had no idea kind of who was going to come in, who was going to be running the company. We had some co-CEOs that stepped in, but we were out of money. And so we either needed to go get some big debt financing, or we needed one of our investors to come in and bail us out. And so there were a few weeks with a lot of uncertainty, and in that, I kind of got pulled into a role. I remember a week after the IPO falls apart, I'm sitting at JP Morgan in New York, meeting with potential investors and trying to explain how the company works. And because my team was left as this company, since we'd spent so much time in the unit economics, that really understood the business. And WeWork was a phenomenal business in the right circumstances. We grew well beyond those circumstances, and that was the issue. But I was there talking to bankers, trying to convince them that, hey, this model really works. And then we ended up getting bailed out by SoftBank. And I remember one day it was like 2 SoftBank teams descended on WeWork. And even they weren't coordinated amongst themselves. They didn't know who was going to run the show. But I found myself in a room kind of explaining to them, hey, here's how the business works. Here are the markets that we do well in. Here are the markets that we don't do well in. And from that, they were just kind of like, okay, well, why don't you ride along with us, help us sort this whole thing out. And it was hard at times because we were letting a lot of people go. So we went from 12,500 all the way back down to 6,000. And there were hard days, but it was a really exciting thing to be doing day to day, to feel like I was in the room trying to save this company, which at the end of the day is an iconic company, for better or worse. It really changed the commercial real estate segment, which is one of the largest asset segments in the world, and it's continuing to do that. So it was an exciting seat to be in.
What out of that specific experience were you able to take over to Maven and to directly parlay into what they needed you to do, to the point you were talking about with optimization versus growth and the balance between those two things? What would you not have been able to do at Maven had you not had that experience post-IPO at WeWork?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that got me excited about the opportunity at Maven is I learned a lot of things at WeWork about how not to grow a business. And there were many days at WeWork where I was putting out a fire that I was like, this fire never should have been set. And it's because as decisions were being made day by day, nobody was taking that lens of, this Band-Aid that I put on here, is this going to work when the company is twice as big, when the company is 10 times as big? So what I saw myself doing when I came over to Maven is like, I can be the guy asking some of those questions. So I spent a lot of time trying to really understand how the business works. And one of the things that I wanted to avoid was that situation I spoke about earlier, where there was so much duplication in all of the teams that were built out. And that makes it hard to get things done. It makes it incredibly demotivating for people. And I did see at WeWork a lot of great talent come in, not get put in the right spot, not utilized the right way, and moved out. And I really wanted to make sure at Maven that the structure that we were building made sense, that we didn't have duplication, and that people knew what their jobs were. And so I focused a lot on like, what is the org design and how do all these pieces fit together?
What an opportunity, for one. That just sounds incredible. I know you pride yourself, and you've talked about this a little bit before in other venues, about the idea of identifying talent. And to your point about at WeWork, making sure the talent was in the right place and then taking that lesson over to Maven. What are the patterns you see? Talking to a room full of 300-some students who are interested in becoming the next everything, what do they look for when they're hiring? How do you identify top talent?
Yeah, I mean, I think you need to really test for the culture fit in the interview process. And the problem that I've seen happen at several companies now is that when you are in this hypergrowth phase, and it ebbs and flows. Sometimes you're in hypergrowth and you can't hire fast enough. Sometimes it's like, whoa, we went a little bit too fast. Let's pare back here and make sure people are in the right seats. But when you're in hypergrowth, people stop thinking as much about the folks that they're bringing on, and they just bring on bodies. And you need to focus in that recruiting process on, even though you might need that body yesterday, how can you make sure that it's the right person for the role? And one of the key things I think is you want people that have a lot of humility, because you can't have somebody come in and say, oh, I've been in this company, I know how this shit works, here's how it works. You need somebody that has a lot of humility, because they're stepping into a world where every startup is its own thing and every startup is crazy. And you need somebody who's going to take the time to really figure out how they can best drive impact in that type of environment. And then you need problem solvers. So every startup is loaded with problems. It's not that helpful for somebody to come in and start pointing out all the problems. And I've seen the people that have not done well in those environments, that's what they fall back to. It's like, oh, this is wrong over here. This is wrong over here. It's like, we know there are hundreds of things that are wrong. Like, get your sleeves up and start fixing them with us. And I think that type of proactive problem solving is another key trait that I'm trying to hire for.
Do, you might say. Okay, perfect. We're on the right path. The talented people that you're employing and you're putting in positions to be problem solvers, of course, are part of a larger team. They're part of a construct. Give us the ideal dynamic of a team. Is there only one leader? Is there co-leaders? Is there more worker bees than tell us a little bit about what that makeup looks like. What do you try to do when you're hiring at Maven and trying to construct those teams? What's the components? Yeah, so at an earlier stage, and we're not early stage anymore, but I think we're still at the point where one thing I don't have a lot of patience for is professional managers. And I think anybody who you bring on into the company needs to be able to roll up their sleeves and get work done themselves, and then is hopefully building a team under them so that they're able to level up and take on more of that strategic thinking. But my view is that every leader needs to be able to do the work as well, so that they can guide the team that's ultimately going to be taking on that work. One of the challenges that we have really nice people at Maven. I mean, incredible people that have come there for the mission. Everybody wants to be helpful, and that can be a trap at times. So I'd say our culture a few years ago was collaborative to a fault, where everybody wants to jump in and help to solve a problem. But what that means is that nobody's taking that ownership over a problem and being the one that is ultimately listening to the ideas that are brought to the table, but able to make decisions and drive something forward. So one thing that we've really driven deep into our culture in the past 2 years is the idea of a SPOA, a single point of accountability. And so that comes up all the time, and we're having executive meetings, team meetings. Here's this thing that we want to do. Who's the SPOA? And so always figuring out, yes, you want everybody contributing, everybody collaborating, but you also need that single point of accountability that's actually able to make decisions and is on the hook for delivering at the end of the day. Does that person always have to be the most senior person on the team? Oftentimes they are. I'd say it's not 100% necessary, but you want somebody who, if you're at the exec level
and something doesn't work, you don't want there to be an exec there that's able to say, oh, this person 3 levels down the organization, it's their fault it didn't work.
Sure.
So I'd say usually you take the big problem, there's somebody on the exec team who is the SPOA, and then they're having those same conversations with their team and making sure they're breaking that problem up, identifying SPOAs for every working group that's driving towards a solution.
I'm fascinated as you're talking about this because I keep hearing from different perspectives about the notion of culture being set top down and then culture being organically allowed to kind of rise from bottom up. From what I hear you talking about with SPOAs and the exec team kind of having sponsorship over their teams, it sounds like it's a very strong top-down mentality. Is that accurate?
You know, I think it probably meets in the middle, which I realize is a total cop-out to your question. But there are elements that need to be top-down driven. And I think creating
Specifically what?
Creating a performance-driven culture and a culture of accountability, I think that can only come from the top. But, you know,
what can only come from the bottom?
Yeah, so if I think about Maven, you know, the core to what we do every day, we're a digital health platform that connects people with care. And the front line of our company are care advocates. And they're the people that are actually meeting with an individual that has a problem, that's trying to build their family, and meeting them with this unbelievable level of empathy and understanding that I think is the core to everything that we do to Maven and the success that we've had in the market. And that empathy is something that has come from the bottom and has come from those care advocates who are our front line.
For anyone who doesn't already feel as though they are a naturally empathetic person who otherwise embodies this ability to have a strong relatability, maybe it's just due to the fact that they're not as social as others. How can they develop empathy? How can they make themselves a more attractive hire to someone like a Maven?
So I once got a 0 on an empathy score. So I might be that person that you're talking about. But no, I remember doing a test when I was at BCG, and it was basically like, what is your first response when somebody comes to you with a problem? And I can't even remember what the 4 were, but mine is always like, I'm gonna jump in and solve it. It's never like, I understand that must be tough. And so I don't think I am the most empathetic person out there. It's not my natural inclination, but when you're leading teams, you have to have it. If you're not empathetic in building your team and meeting your people that you're asking to come and deliver for you every day where they are and understanding them as persons and what motivates them, then you'll just never be successful as a leader.
So for you, was it just becoming conscious and forcing yourself to be more cognizant of becoming empathetic through opportunities that presented themselves, or how did you develop that skill set?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a lot of what it is just being conscious of it and forcing yourself to have that step back moment when somebody comes to you and saying like, okay, what is the right response here? And once you're, you know, I've looked at a lot of these personality test things over the years, and I know some companies are always looking at them. You know, that does not dictate how you have to act in any situation. They tell you what your normal response is, and then you need to be aware of that and figure out when you need to tailor your approach. And for me, where I need to tailor my approach has really been in leading my teams.
I love that. The personality test does not tell you how you have to act. It tells you who you are and how to tailor your approach. That's perfect. Talking about teams and kind of giving some thought to the career that you've had, what for you is required to be in place? How do you analyze an opportunity to join a team before you do?
I mean, every time you join a company, you're making a bet. And so I talked before about how part of it is a bet on yourself, but a big piece is a bet on the company. And especially if you're going even earlier stage than Maven is, you know, the equity could be nice, but it's not a sure bet. And so I think you need to make sure that there is some semblance of product market fit. Obviously, you can build that over time. But also that the team that you're going to be joining are the folks that you want to be in the trenches with. And yeah, I've had a few conversations with Laszlo Bach, who ran the HR function at Google in its early days. And one of the things that he actually shared with our whole team at Maven is he said, working for a startup is like getting punched in the face every day. But what is the alternative? And you can join a big tech company and you can spend 2 years figuring out where to put a button on one page, or you can really build something. But knowing that getting into a startup, you're going to get punched in the face every day, are you jumping into an environment where you have the people there that are going to lift you up again and keep moving.
For you, how critical is it that you have access or the ability to otherwise be in the room with the founders and with the people who are at the very top of the company?
When I joined WeWork, I didn't have that at first, and that was part of telling my team that if they just kept doing good work and they were collaborative people that were bringing solutions to the table, then things would work out. And so over time, I got to that level, and I was in the room, and spent time with Adam, spent time with his direct reports as we were trying to get the IPO off the ground successfully. For me, that was what I strove to do. That's where I wanted to be. And I just think it is so fascinating seeing the dynamics that play out at that level. And it's complicated, and it's a fun ride, though.
I can only imagine. Most of the students, of course, are still in a position where they're going to start off their entry-level careers, and they're going to be kind of cutting their teeth as they go about it. To become the founder whisperer that you were able to, WeWork and then subsequently at Maven, requires you to do what in managing up at those opportunities? How do you manage up? And explain to the students a little bit about what that might look like and mean.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So much of it is about building trust. And I think trust is the hardest thing for a lot of founders to come to because they have built this thing. It is their baby. And a lot of times I think they start from a position of, you need to prove yourself before I'm actually going to trust you. So then the question is, how can you build that trust? And a lot of that is delivering what you promise and being over-communicating upwards, not in that you're drowning your boss with pages and pages of emails, but let them know what you're working on. Also, make sure that you're celebrating your wins and your team's wins with your managers, because everybody wants a win. And so one of the things that I've realized, some founders, senior folks that I've worked with in the past is you start the meeting off with the win. There's always going to be problems. So it's hey, this is an awesome thing that just happened last week. And just set the mood to get things excited, and then you're able to problem solve much more effectively together.
It's fascinating. Total segue, or no segue, total pivot here, but you went to the Herb Institute, which I have always thought is a great place here at U of M. If you could take a minute to tell the students exactly what that is, and then give us a sense of, does sustainability play into your role at Maven? If so, how? And if not, do you think you'll ever kind of go into a different field?
Yeah, so I was an Herb student, which meant I got my MBA and the MS in Natural Resources and the Environment. The area that I really focused on was systems thinking and sustainable energy systems. Obviously, all these environmental issues are so interconnected from a systems perspective. I thought I was going to be that clean tech entrepreneur. It didn't happen out the gate. One of the things that drove me to WeWork and then to Maven was a desire to stay in this broader tech ecosystem, because I actually think there are a lot of connections. I was in commercial real estate, which I never thought I'd be in. Now I'm in healthcare, which, funny story, I swore off after doing a year of healthcare consulting out of undergrad. I said I never want to touch this industry again, but now I'm back there. But I think there, in my mind, yes, I actually still have that strong passion to do clean tech work. I've got a long career ahead of me, hopefully. I don't think that the path that I've gone down has shut that door in any way. I think that I'm learning a lot of transferable skills in how to build a company that are going to play very well whenever I'm able to make that pivot and do that.
Sure, absolutely. Sustainability and clean tech, of course, are industries subject to a lot of regulation for anything you went forward, but I'd have to imagine the regulatory affairs around Maven and what you've dealt with there would have to lean in. Specifically, I'm thinking about the SCOTUS ruling in June, which you can tell the students a little bit about maybe what that produced, how that changed things. I'm curious to hear you talk a little bit about what forced pivots that made in your growth strategy that you had otherwise lined up for the company, the impact it had.
Yeah, no, great question. So Maven's core is that we think there are unmet needs in healthcare, particularly in women's and family health, regarding access to care.
And just to be clear, SCOTUS, Supreme Court of the United States.
So we have a digital app that allows you to connect with any of 35 different types of providers in minutes. And that's filling these gaps of care that lots of folks have. but particularly folks in rural areas, folks that are less advantaged economically. So when the Supreme Court ruling came out, basically it was a massive restriction on access to care. And reproductive health, abortion, it is healthcare, and it is a critical part of the healthcare journey for many of our members because we're supporting them during their pregnancy. And unfortunately, there is times when you need to turn back to that as a core component of healthcare that is required. So we did start to get a lot of interest from the companies that we work with in saying, hey, what's your position on this? How do you think about it? What can we do here? And we had, we had a number of webinars to talk about our belief that abortion is healthcare, and that we have a component of our offering that we've always had, which is pregnancy options counseling, which is helping individuals think through what are their options in the event that they're pregnant. So we took that was something we had always done. We brought it a lot more front and center in our conversations with employers that we work with. The other thing that we did is we have a product that I actually helped incubate, which is called Maven Wallet, which is for companies that want to provide financial support for their employee benefits, which was predominantly being used for adoption and surrogacy journeys or fertility journeys, which is a really increasingly common benefit that companies are providing. And we were actually able to take that product, quickly pivot it to help companies provide financial support for individuals that may have to travel across state lines to get care. So kind of with our options counseling and that wallet product, we had a really compelling thing that we could bring to the market to help the clients that we worked with manage through the impact of that ruling on their own employees.
How does it change the growth plan for the following 2, 5, 10 years for Maven? What does it do to change maybe the services that are offered in addition to the opportunities to launch a wallet where it's an opportunity to pivot and provide them a new product offering, but I wouldn't imagine that's probably where the big revenue stream is going to come from now. Does it create a new source of revenue for you in a way unexpected before?
I don't think there's a significant new source of revenue. I mean, what was the most interesting is that a lot of the things that we're now emphasizing in the market were things that we've always done, and it's just the market started to care. And so I do think that it's created a moment where what we've been working on for the past 7 years is now just increasingly important, increasingly present, and certainly could help from a growth perspective, but it's been, our mission has never been as important as it is right now.
It's fascinating. We had a founder of Work at Health here a couple weeks ago, a fellow U of M alum, and I had asked her the question of kind of the biggest threats to the company that they had as a digital health company that is continuing to grow out but isn't fully accepted yet by mainstream society, isn't protected by law. What are the biggest threats to Maven's growth?
Put me on the spot here. I wish I had prepped for this one.
That's okay.
In healthcare, as you mentioned, there's always regulatory issues that are at stake. And certainly regulatory changes could negatively impact us, but it's not something that we spend a lot of time thinking about. I mean, at this point, Maven is lucky enough to partner with some of the largest health plans in the country. And so we're very embedded in the healthcare delivery ecosystem at this point. And have some partners that are also very vested in ensuring that this all continues to work. So I don't think that those are really threats. I think the main thing in my mind would just be staying nimble and staying ahead of the competition. And so there are other companies that are out there in their space. We've spent a lot of time over the past few years. We brought in a great product leader. And it was an area where I think we had struggled a little bit in the past. And one of our OKRs, I talked about OKRs for this year, was not just delivering something on a product roadmap, but actually delivering a product function that is going to continue to be able to innovate and continue to be able to deliver. And so we've made a lot of personnel changes, both on the product side. We brought in a new head of engineering. We've restructured how our product teams work together. And like that is the sustainable advantage, is if you can be a company that doesn't just put out, one product feature that people get excited about, but can continue to innovate and put out product features. Having, I think, a lot of the great, big tech companies, that's really what got them where they are right now. And that's something that we absolutely need to get right if we're going to continue to lead the category.
It's amazing. Well, I want to make sure we have time for student questions. So I think Rashika and Sebastian are right up there. So Nick, if we could turn up the lights just a little bit. In the meantime, while they're jumping down, I'll ask you, as someone who's been incredibly resourceful and seeking out opportunities and creating opportunities in your career, when you think back to being an MBA student here, what resource do you wish you still had access to that was just invaluable now in hindsight?
I mean, time. Time is the main thing. Like there was so much time when I was in school where you could think and you could bring around a really smart group of people and spend time solving a problem and getting different ideas. And that's the main resource I've lost. Everything moves way too fast, and you never have that time to really just sit down and think.
Oh, that's so true. Okay, student questions. Sebastian, do you have one there? Oh. Go ahead.
You mentioned selling earlier in the talk. Could you talk more about that? For example, where and how did you learn to sell the most, and how do you think about selling in general?
Yeah, good question. I was talking about the importance of sales, and now, as of a month ago, I lead our sales team as my new job. So now I guess I'm fully a sales guy. But some of it I learned in consulting, because kind of consulting as your job changes from, hey, I'm the analyst coming in to do all the work, and you move up the ranks, you start having to sell projects and sell clients. And so sales becomes an increasingly big part of your career in consulting, is probably where I learned a lot of it. And then I would say I'm still learning a lot. And I get a lot of feedback as I'm on sales calls. We try to create a culture of open feedback. And even in the past 2 years, as I've increasingly become kind of the front person on sales calls, I've evolved a lot in my approach, and especially in thinking through how you're selling something that isn't necessarily there yet, because we're all selling the dream, we're all selling the future. And that has been a tough skill, to give your buyer confidence that you're really going to deliver on something that maybe is still sitting in the product roadmap for a few quarters out.
Piggybacking on that real quick, what's the biggest misconception about sales?
I think that it's just like, I don't know, I feel like people, when I was an MBA, you've got this vision of like a sales guy that you probably saw from an 80s movie or something. And it's like, I don't want to be that guy. Or like, I don't want to be the guy who's always schmoozing folks out on a golf course. And I think that is the misconception, is that it's a dirty business to get into, and that maybe folks have a different set of morals than you do. But at the end of the day, there's nothing more important in building a company than being able to sell. And if you can go out there and sell something with a mission as phenomenal as Maven, I don't think there's a more rewarding job out there to have.
Rashika, did you have a student question? Up there?
I have a quick question. You're involving in healthcare industry right now. What is the next area of improvement which you want to see in Maven Clinic?
So I mean, we're certainly a healthcare company. One of the things that I think is critical in healthcare is, in the US, we have a very inefficient system. Our healthcare costs a lot more than it costs anywhere else in the world, and we do not deliver the outcomes that you would expect go along with that cost. And that is particularly true in the area of maternal health, where the outcomes in the US are, I don't have the statistics on the tip of my tongue, but it's abysmal what's happening here in the US. And I think one of the key things that, as a whole, the healthcare industry is evolving to is value-based care, and really tying our revenue model to being able to drive those positive health outcomes. So that's a key thing that we're working towards, and I think the healthcare industry writ large is working towards that. And it's going to be an area that we continue to evolve the next few years.
No, go ahead. So it seems like... behind you, microphone. Sorry.
So one thing I want to ask about was when you mentioned earlier that teams would get closer together and that you need to have them trust each other. in the trenches to be able to work well. So what are some encounters that you've seen where teams have been able to grow closer together that way? And how do you promote that as a team leader?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is just created by the situations. And, you know, if you think about your classic, like, wartime trench buddies, right? Like, when you're in those spots where you need to work together, it comes out naturally. And so you don't need a crisis to create those. You can put people together to solve a problem and use that as the forcing function to get teams working together. You don't have to wait until it's a crisis.
Thank you. Go ahead.
So it seems like Maven has been in an excellent position to address the inequities in the current healthcare system. And what steps do you think that Maven can and should take in the future to continue addressing those inequities?
Yeah, so half of all births in the country are covered by Medicaid. And if we really want to drive better maternal outcomes for society at large, we can't do it if we never address half of the births in the country. And so I think that is a key area where we're thinking, you know, we have a digital app. It works phenomenally well on a smartphone. You can access it on the web as well, but most people access it through a smartphone. As we think about serving a Medicaid population, kind of everything changes in terms of how do you access these members to get them aware of the benefit. How do you get them to, do they have the technology that allows them to engage in an effective way? But at our core has been building trust with our members as their trusted provider, because trust is so broken in the healthcare system. And if we can find a way to effectively do that with Medicaid populations, I think there's a tremendous opportunity for us to address those health inequities in the U.S.
Are there any experiments in play right now at Maven to do
Yeah,
that?
we have Medicaid populations that we're working with today. So we're working with, Jeff, just going to be careful, don't know who I'm allowed to name. But we are working with some Medicaid populations and piloting different things, you know, back to that MVP point, seeing what works, what doesn't, and continuing to evolve on that front.
That's awesome. Question up top.
Hello. Thank you so much for coming to talk to us. My question for you is, what is the biggest mistake that you made, like with WeWork or with any of the companies you worked for, and how did you bounce back from that?
Great question.
So one was my mentality when I came into Maven, which I mentioned before, which was like, I got to drive this thing to efficiency, and taking my eye off the ball on, like, actually for now, growth is the absolute most important thing. But another fun mistake is I live in a town called Montclair, New Jersey, just outside of New York. And one of the things I was doing at WeWork was evaluating our strategy and where we were going to put buildings. And I knew that the WeWork model works phenomenally well when you're in an inner city core commercial district where you have restaurants around, gyms. And Elise came up from Montclair, and I was like, there is no way that a WeWork in the suburbs is ever going to work. And I personally killed that deal. And then a pandemic hit. And I would love to have a WeWork right down the street from me right now. And I'm sure a lot of other people in the community would as well. So I did not see that one coming. And I really, like, that was going to be my hill to die on, was that I was going to kill that deal no matter what. And in retrospect, it would have been a good deal for the company.
Lesson in humility. Sure.
Hi. I was just wondering if you had any mentors along the way, and if so, how they helped you, and if you have any suggestions on finding them.
Yeah, so I am not as good at this as other people are. There are people that have a whole stable of mentors that I'm super jealous of the fact that they've created that. I will say I have had a few good mentors over the time that have not been, I have not been good about proactively developing that network, and would encourage you to do better than I did. But pretty much at every stage in my career, I can think of one person that, well after leaving that company, I always call for advice. So there's a partner I worked with a lot at BCG who every career move I've ever made, I still give him a call and get his take on it. And then there's a buddy of mine who I worked with at WeWork, very much in the trenches together with, who I still call all the time for advice. So I do have a few that have just kind of happened naturally. It is incredibly helpful. And the higher that you get in your career, I think it is critical, because it gets lonely and you have a lot less people that you can talk to. And having that stable of folks who you can call and bounce ideas off of is super helpful.
To extend that just a little bit, you and I were talking before class about Kate Ryder, the CEO, founder of Maven, and her ability to pivot the role that she's in and adapt, and understanding the need to kind of do that. Can you speak to a little bit about any mentorship she had to understand how to go through that, and then the value of the fluid nature that she's taken to the role?
Yeah, so I don't want to put words in her mouth around kind of the mentors that she's tapped into in that, but I know she has reached out to a lot of folks for advice on this. And I think it's one of the hardest things for any founder to do, is to realize when you need to step back and when you need to trust and let people run, because there's obviously a scale in any startup when you can make every decision, you can make every hire. And once you get beyond that, it's challenging. And what I will say to Kate's credit is it has been a real pleasure watching her over the last few years make that transition. I think this is the most exciting time to be in a startup, is kind of when you're going from 100 employees to 500 employees. I was telling Eric before, like, that's where the culture really gets set. And then I think when you get beyond that, there's a point where like you step into the culture that you have, and that's at WeWork. The culture had been set. I was never going to change it when I stepped in. But a big part of that culture is that transition that founder needs to make at that point, from being a true founder that operates everything to being that visionary that's still out there in the market, selling the ideas, but is very targeted in where they're engaging across the rest of the company, so that day to day, the machine underneath them can continue to run efficiently.
Leading by example. All right, last question. Score prediction for tomorrow versus Maryland football game?
Oh, God. I mean, we've been putting a lot of points on the board lately, so I'd say this one's going to be a little bit harder. I'm going to go 45-21.
Okay, heard it here first. All right, thank you, everybody.